Hi, thank you all for joining us today at the World Alzheimer's Solutions Conference. 6 years ago, my daughter Miriam got diagnosed with osteosarcoma. And at that time, I was running an educational nonprofit. I was thought that if you go to the best hospitals, so Kettering, doctors would have the answers. We found that battling an aggressive cancer, that the options are unfortunately, are scary. But our oncologist, Sloan Kettering, was developing a drug that seemed incredibly promising. It could reduce the recurrence of osteosarcoma by 50%. Only trouble is that the company developing that drug, MTP, could not raise sufficient capital to do the final clinical trial that was needed for approval. And at that time, that seemed quite shocking. I thought that Sloan Kettering's place is one of the largest cancer research centers in the world. I thought that they run clinical trials. Osteosarcoma impacts maybe 800 kids a year. So why do they need a company, this small company no one has ever heard of, to help develop a drug? And what about the NIH, the National Cancer Institute? Where are they in all this? And shockingly, what we discovered was that there's an ecosystem that average person is simply not aware of. While governments and charities support what's called basic research, and every year thousands of papers are published with all kinds of promising cures, and we read about them in the headlines. Cancer cured, Alzheimer's cured. We never realize the potential of those cures, because any drug that will save your life will be developed by a drug company. While you could do basic research and your NIH grants, National Cancer Institute grants, could support a lab of maybe $1 million a year, to do clinical trials, it takes tens of millions. Without those trials, without testing those potential cures, I think it was found, we will never know about it. It will just remain in the newspaper. And the pipeline for those trials is continually shrinking across all diseases. I started studying this, research, economic research behind a fascinating thing, that the cost of developing a single drug per $1 billion invested doubles every 9 years. So it costs 80 times more today to develop a single drug. The number of shots on goal you need to do with developing promising research that never quite pans out until you finally hit the right spot. That risk is getting greater and greater. And hence it costs 80 times more today to develop a single drug than it did in 1950. They coined this trend in the pharmaceutical industry, Ehrum's law. Actually, Moore's law, spelled backwards. Many of you are aware of Moore's law, which is the trend for semiconductors, for computer chips, who get twice as fast and twice as small every 18 months, coined by Gordon Moore. The pharmaceutical industry is just the opposite. It costs twice as more every 9 years to develop a drug than it did, just 9 years before that. And what this trend means is that pharmaceuticals have been firing scientists by the thousands, because they're getting out of this initial R&D, leaving it to smaller companies like the ones we've heard presentations from. And those companies struggle to develop medicines that potentially could save lives, because while we give charity to support basic research, to scientists to work on very, very basic stuff that will never actually, which doesn't directly benefit patients. Ironically, once we find something that could actually be developed into life-saving drugs, suddenly we look at that development like we would look at a startup. And we purely look at it as a way, whether we'll make money or not. And at that point in time, and this is what's called the Death Valley in the pharmaceutical industry. See all that development that's happened, all the wonderful cures that are developed, well, they never made it. They're lost in that valley, because in order for anything to happen, we need companies to get the investment they need in order to develop the drug. Now, how do we get from here to Alzheimer's? We ask ourselves a question, 1 second here. Imagine if the question of making that investment, that company, the investors in the company that was developing the drug that my daughter needed, imagine if there were hundreds of thousands of osteosarcoma fathers and mothers who had to make a decision on whether to invest a small amount in that company so they can develop that drug, right? Who could own that company? Would those decisions be made differently? Would we look at it purely as a financial investment, or would we look at it more? Would we do everything we can to make sure that drug is developed? Now, osteosarcoma impacts 800 kids a year, so unfortunately, even if all the parents would get together, it would be difficult for us to finance those trials for those osteosarcoma companies. But about a disease like Alzheimer's, the only top 10 cause of death where there's no treatment or cure. 26% of Americans have a relative with Alzheimer's. About half of us are likely to develop Alzheimer's if we live to old age. And as we saw in today's conference, there are countless companies, right? Scientists who are developing potential drugs that could save our lives. And they could take years and years just raising the money, or never raise the money at all. So people ask, let's fund, a brilliant scientist to develop a cure, to make a discovery. Life-saving drugs aren't made in an aha moment in the lab, because that aha moment may have already happened. Somebody may have already found the cure. But unless they do clinical trials and develop that into a drug, nobody will know about it. Today, there are at least 62 MIT research by Andrew Lowe's lab, that at least 64 targets of Alzheimer's that could lead to life-saving drugs. That means there are papers and IP on file that if they're developed, they could save lives, tens of millions of lives, hundreds of millions of lives. Wouldn't it make sense for us to invest just a small amount each month in order to ensure that all of those are developed? It takes $30 million in investment in phase 1 or phase 2 trial, $30 million or more, depending on the drug, to do a phase 1 or phase 2 clinical trial. Today, and I know David will talk about this in his presentation, over the past 10 years, only $700 million of venture capital went into Alzheimer's companies. So $74 million a year on average, 16 times more or less than cancer. That's only a couple of companies, 2-3 companies funded each year. That's nothing. And yet, our lives depend on this. Now imagine a world where drug companies were owned by millions of investors who are not investing their money they need for retirement, but investing just their spare change, motivated by their common need for a cure. Should we invest in companies that are developing products that will save our lives? Because we need those products more than we need return on investment. This is why we founded InvestAcure. With the online industry, and we were working in our nonprofit, educational nonprofit with a lot of millennials, and an app called Acorns became very popular. It's a very simple concept. Millennials don't have any money left at the end of the month. They set up an investment account. They connect their credit card, connect their bank account. The system calculates up to the nearest dollar. Suppose you bought a coffee in Starbucks for $4.80. Would you like 20 cents to be deposited in your investment account for investment? It feels painless. About $50 a month. Invest in your spare change feels painless. Acorns, they launched about, they got to 1 million users. Now they're at about 4 million. What if we take that same concept and apply it to people impacted by disease? Invest your spare change, own shares in a portfolio of companies selected by leading researchers in the space. You don't have to make decisions. You don't have to make the call which company to choose. You'll own stock automatically in a group of companies that have truly promising research vetted by the best scientists in the field. You invest just your spare change. You can afford. You own stock. If the company develops a drug that's licensed, you may even make a ton of money. Worst case, if your investment goes down, you only invested a small amount. It's no worse than giving charity. That is the concept. Now, investment will be made in, as public investors, we would have to invest in publicly traded, and many of the companies are privately traded, so we'll be setting up a BDC, Business Development Corporation, to allow for such investment. Now, let's say Acorns, as mentioned, in just 3 years is at 4 million users. There's 70 million Americans who have a relative with Alzheimer's. They're very easy to reach. The proposition is very strong because if we all invest our spare change and we get our families to invest, if just 2.4% of people who have a relative with Alzheimer's invest their spare change, that's 1.7 million users. We can get there in less than 3 years. That's $1 billion a year annual investment. $1 billion. 10 times more than the current level of investment. That would make sure that every viable solution, every small company that believes they have a cure and that's vetted by scientists, they can progress in that research. That's a game changer. And we would be the owners of these companies. These companies would be owned by us, by the public, with the idea that as shareholders, we can hold them accountable to finding a cure, to putting science even above profit. We've gathered a team, some of them you'll hear from today. Bill, the vice chairman, former vice chairman of NASDAQ, Ken Abramowitz, one of the top pharmaceutical analysts on Wall Street Hall of Fame, Yu-Kai Chow, who is designing the UI UX. We have a team of leading scientists in the space. We're happy to have George and Hugo here with us today. There are many, many more. Once we launch this, the idea would be to market this to go to volunteer networks of people impacted by disease, to run ads on Facebook and Google. Everybody who's diagnosed with Alzheimer's Googles the disease. They're very reachable. If we all invest our spare change, we can ensure that every viable cure can be developed. And we can all be held accountable to share that idea with our friends, with our families, with our communities. We currently built a demo of the system, worked with the SEC for approval. We have one of the largest law firms in the world, Eversham Sutherland, representing us pro bono, developing all the systems with the SEC as they grow. And currently, we are raising a $3 million round to launch in the next 6 to 8 months with the idea of executing a plan to ensure that $1 billion every year will go into Alzheimer's, and ensure that every drug that has the potential to save lives on it. Thank you.